Vamos a saludar a Andrew Giuliani, él es el hijo de Rudy Giuliani. Recordemos que Rudy Giuliani no solamente fue uno de los más importantes abogados del presidente Donald Trump, muy cercano colaborador, sino además, pues, el alcalde de la ciudad de Nueva York, que se convirtió en un héroe en tiempos del 11 de septiembre del 2001, hace ya 20 años. Pues Andrew quiere seguir los pasos de su papá, quiere convertirse en gobernador de Nueva York, gobernador del estado de Nueva York. Él tiene 35 años, fue asesor especial del expresidente Donald Trump y ahora está trabajando como colaborador en la cadena conservadora Newsmax. ¿Cómo plantea él esa candidatura? ¿Cómo va a ser esa campaña para llegar a la gobernación del estado de Nueva York? Por favor, Violeta, saludemos al señor Andrew Giuliani. Y lo primero que quiero preguntarle es, ¿qué piensa su papá, el señor Rudolph, de su candidatura?
Andrew, welcome to W Radio. How are you today?
Thank you very much for having me, and I'm doing very well. I really appreciate it. I apologize that my Spanish is not better. I guess the best thing I can say is hablo un poco español, pero mi tema es muy mal porque soy mal estudiante en la clase de español.
No importa, bien, está bien. Se oye bien su español, señor Giuliani. Gracias.
Let me ask you, what does your father think about your political campaign?
So he has been a great advisor so far. We announced 17 days ago now. He has such great knowledge, not just of New York City, but of New York State. And he is 100% behind it. You know, I told the story a couple of times, but it bears repeating. When I told him that I was considering this, he said, okay, I have dinner tonight, but come over tomorrow. I went over to his house. For about 3 hours, he was in complete cross-examination, prosecutor mode, and I felt what it must have felt like to be a mob boss in the 80s when he was putting him there. And after about 3 hours, he said, holy smokes, you're ready for this, son. What can I do to help? And from that moment, he has just been an incredible asset.
Bueno, nos dice, primero se disculpa por su español porque dice que no es muy bueno, no era como muy buen estudiante en esa clase de español, pero no, lo habla muy bien. Y pues de la pregunta de Juan Pablo sobre el respaldo que le ha dado su papá, sobre qué piensa, y dice que ha sido hasta el momento un gran consejero, ya son 17 días desde que hizo el anuncio, y pues nos cuenta que el papá es un gran apoyo porque tiene un gran conocimiento no solo de la ciudad de Nueva York, sino del estado, está respaldándolo al 100%. Cuando le dijo y le comentó que estaba considerando lanzarse, pues lo invitó a su casa y estuvo 3 horas en modo fiscal interrogándolo, y después de todo ese tiempo le dijo, hijo, usted está listo, ¿cómo hago para ayudarlo? Y desde ese entonces ha sido un gran apoyo y pues un gran respaldo que tiene su candidatura.
Violeta, me gustaría preguntar sobre la pandemia en Nueva York, ¿no? Porque sabemos que Nueva York fue el epicentro de la pandemia y ahora se ha recuperado. Estamos viendo cómo la tasa de contagio está bajando. ¿Cómo él evalúa la administración de Nueva York en el combate de la pandemia? ¿Y qué haría diferente? ¿Qué hubiera hecho diferente?
Mr. Giuliani, New York became the global epicenter of the pandemic, but it has also had a tremendous recovery. How do you evaluate New York's administration in regards to the pandemic?
Well, I would say, if you look at New York and you look at the death rate for 100,000 people in New York, New York would be the second leading country in the world in that regard. I would say it's been a complete failure in New York. I think the only country that would be worse if it was a country was New Jersey. So I would say that New York did a terrible job at protecting their citizens. I think sometimes some people in the media have protected Governor Cuomo. They protected Governor Murphy in New York. But I look specifically at the nursing home executive order that Cuomo signed, the 15,000, and I wouldn't say all 15,000 are because of Governor Cuomo's fault, but I would say certainly 9,000 of them died because Andrew Cuomo signed that executive order when, you got to remember, the USS Comfort was coming up the eastern seaboard in order to take sick New York senior citizens. You had the Javits Center with empty beds. Andrew Cuomo did not want to give anyone else the political win, and that's what cost those New Yorkers, those 9,000 senior citizens, their lives. So I would say they failed, and their failure actually cost New Yorkers their lives.
Nos califica su labor como terrible, dice que fue un fracaso absoluto y le atribuye a Andrew Cuomo los 9,000 muertos en esos ancianatos por la orden que firmó. Dice que ha hecho una terrible labor protegiendo a los ciudadanos. Dice que si fuera un país, fuera el segundo país con más muertes o la tasa de muertes en el mundo, así que considera la labor de Andrew Cuomo como un fracaso.
Con todo lo que está pasando con el presidente Donald Trump y especialmente también con su padre, con Rudy Giuliani, con las autoridades, ¿cree él que esta reputación de su padre lo ayuda o lo perjudica en su carrera, en su campaña electoral?
Mr. Giuliani, with all that's happening with your father's investigation about his activities in Ukraine and the reputation of Mr. Donald Trump, do you think this will affect your candidacy?
It's a good question. You know, I'm going to let New Yorkers decide that, and the truth is, I'm going to be genuine. You know, one of the things that I hate the most is when I see politicians who are not genuine to themselves. They try to frame this or frame that. The truth is, I worked 4 years for President Trump in the White House. I'm proud of a lot of the policies that came out of that White House. I'm my father's son. My name is Giuliani, and I'm very, very proud of his accomplishments. I know that they're controversial in some areas, but guess what? I'm not going to run away from them. You know, I think about some of the policies that I'm very, very proud of. You know, I think about the fact that at the beginning of 2020, we had the lowest unemployment rate since man walked on the moon in the United States of America, the lowest Hispanic unemployment rate in the United States in the history of our country. Same thing with the African-American unemployment rate, Asian-American unemployment rate. Those are the kind of policies that I want to bring to New York. So I'm going to propose the policies, and I'll let New Yorkers decide whether or not those are the policies that they believe is going to save our state and bring it back, instead of seeing people continue to leave the state for Florida, for Texas, for Tennessee, for South Carolina, and for other places.
Es una buena pregunta y él va a dejar que los neoyorquinos decidan. Él simplemente va a ser genuino porque valora eso en un político, ser genuino. Él trabajó muy orgulloso del lado del presidente Trump y también está muy orgulloso de los logros de su padre, que aunque tengan políticas que son controversiales, él no va a huir de eso, sino que va a resaltar esas políticas de las que se siente orgulloso, como la que se hizo a comienzo del 2020, en la que se creó la tasa más baja de desempleo desde que el hombre fue a la luna. Dice que también hubo una tasa muy baja de desempleo entre los latinos, entre los asiáticos. Ese es el tipo de políticas que quiere llevar al estado de Nueva York y que quiere proponer, y dejará ya que los neoyorquinos decidan si quieren irse con él o no y salvar el estado.
Candidato Giuliani, usted acaba de mencionar a la comunidad hispana. ¿Cuál es su propuesta para conquistar el voto hispano en su estado?
You just mentioned the Hispanic communities in the state. What is your proposal to convince these voters?
Yeah, well, let's start with school choice. You know, I think, and this certainly affects many of the cities in New York State, less of the rural areas, but this is an issue in Buffalo, it's an issue in Rochester, somewhat of an issue in Albany, and it's certainly a major issue in New York City. You know, Andrew Cuomo ran on a platform of being pro-school choice, pro-charter schools. Unfortunately, in this last budget, we saw that he kept the cap at 270 in New York City and 460 in New York State. Now, I was very blessed to have parents that had the means to be able to send me to parochial school, to Catholic school. But if they didn't have the means and they didn't like the educational system that I was in, then there was no other recourse. There was nothing that they could do. I want to make sure that New Yorkers, Hispanic New Yorkers from all different backgrounds know that I am going to continue to push for the fact that parents will be able to have a say over their kids' education and not just bureaucrats in Albany. To me, that's going to affect more traditional blue voting New Yorkers than red voting New Yorkers. I would think that's a major issue right there. So expanded school choice. I think secondly, reducing crime, right? I mean, most of the neighborhoods where crime has spiked in New York State they haven't been traditional white neighborhoods. They've been traditional African American and Hispanic American neighborhoods. I want to make sure that we reduce crime so that way the law-abiding citizens, that they are in a safer area, that they ultimately don't have to worry about illegal weapons, and that we're able to make sure that they are able to live a better quality of life. And thirdly, I'd say, and I know it's a long answer I'm giving you, but from an economic opportunity standpoint, I want to create more jobs. I mean, all the way from, and really when I think about jobs, I'm not just talking about getting by. I'm talking about jobs that become careers where you can support your family right there. And so for me, I want to make sure on day one, we deregulate, we allow businesses that want to create jobs to be able to do that, and we work to cut taxes. That way, the job creators are able to create jobs, so that way there are more jobs out there for people of all different backgrounds and all different races. And also, just in a general standpoint, and again, this answer is even longer, I want to stop dividing us among racial, ethnic, religious, gender groups. We're all New Yorkers. We're all Americans. We may have different backgrounds, but that's the beauty of this country. We all want to work hard, and we all want to make this a better place. Doesn't matter if you're fourth, third generation from Italy like I am, or first generation Puerto Rico or Cuba, the Dominican Republic.
Bueno, nos dice que él cree que en muchas ciudades el tema de la educación es una preocupación y pues él cree que Andrew Cuomo no generó bien ese presupuesto dedicado a la educación. Él quiere asegurarse de que todos los padres puedan enviar a sus hijos al colegio, todos esos padres que no tienen los medios para hacerlo, y quiere asegurarse de que todos los neoyorquinos, sin importar de dónde vengan, puedan tener acceso a una educación. Es en el primer punto. El segundo punto, reducir el crimen. Vemos este crimen creciente en estos lugares donde hay afroamericanos, hispanos, y se quiere reducir el crimen para que puedan sentirse que están en un área segura y tengan una buena calidad de vida. Y en tercer punto, las oportunidades económicas. Él quiere crear muchos más trabajos que sirvan en realidad para que le pueda dar recursos que puedan ayudar a su familia, y desde el día uno él piensa crear esos trabajos recortando los impuestos para así las personas puedan crear más trabajos, ofrecer más trabajos, y para todas las personas, sin importar la raza, sin importar de dónde vengan. Y quiere acabar con esa división de sexo, de razas, de etnias. Quiere trabajar para todos, no importa si eres de la cuarta generación de italianos o de cubanos o de República Dominicana, no importa de dónde vengas, él quiere trabajar para todos los neoyorquinos.
El expresidente Trump enfrenta un proceso legal en Nueva York, un proceso legal muy complejo. En caso de ser condenado él o la organización, ¿él le entregaría un perdón?
Mr. Giuliani, Mr. Donald Trump has a legal process going on, a very complicated one. If he ends up being convicted, would you give him a pardon?
That's a very, very good question. I think I would have to look through the actual process and see actually if this is politically motivated or not. You know, I look at the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, who I think may end up running against Andrew Cuomo on the Democratic side. We'll see if she announces and the timing of that. But you got to remember, she literally, her campaign promise to be the New York Attorney General was, I will sue Donald Trump. I will make his life a living hell. And that's a quote. So pardon my language, but that's a quote. If that doesn't tell you it's politically motivated, then you're not being independent-minded. So I don't want any New Yorker, I don't want anybody connected with New York, I don't want any American to go through a political prosecution. I think, unfortunately, we're seeing that in other areas of the world. You know, my wife is from Lithuania. It was when she grew up the first couple of years of her life under the Soviet Union, and she knows what political prosecutions are like. That shouldn't be happening in the United States. So if I were to determine that anybody was prosecuted because of their political beliefs and only because of their political beliefs, then yes, I would pardon somebody because of that, because that's not the United States of America.
Bueno, nos dice que es una muy buena pregunta. Tiene que revisar primero el proceso y mirar si detrás hay una motivación política. Nos dice que a lo mejor la fiscal general de Nueva York vaya a competir contra Andrew Cuomo del lado demócrata, y hay que recordar que en su campaña para llegar a ese cargo pues prometió demandar en Nueva York a Donald Trump y hacer su vida un infierno, y él dice que si eso no es una motivación política, entonces ¿qué lo es? Y él, visto estas persecuciones en otras partes del mundo, en la Unión Soviética, por ejemplo, de donde viene su esposa, y sabe cómo son esos procesos, entonces él diría que debe revisar el proceso, pero pues que le huele que hay una intención política detrás.
Violeta, él era un niño de 7 años cuando vio a su padre ser alcalde de Nueva York. Entonces mi pregunta es, ¿qué lecciones él aprendió? ¿Cuáles son los recuerdos de esa época? Porque incluso, como Juan Pablo decía anteriormente, su padre fue era el alcalde durante el 11 de septiembre, tuvo un papel esencial en ese momento.
Mr. Giuliani, you were a child. You were 7 years old when your father became mayor of New York. What lessons did you learn? What memories do you have? And especially because your father was mayor when the 9/11 events happened.
Yeah. Well, I think the lessons that I learned more than anything, I have so many New Yorkers that come up to me and they're thirsty for change. They want to see New York State assume that role of, truly the center of commerce, not just in the United States, but in the world again. And they're sickened by what's happened over the last 10 years in New York. The thing I really learned from him was he took a situation that many thought was ungovernable. Remember, there was a Time magazine cover in 1991 that said the rotting apple, said it was an ungovernable situation. He was able to turn it around. And I think the thing that I would remind New Yorkers is that they're able to turn around pretty fast. I mean, by 96, we had Disney coming into Times Square. You had the crime rate down 50% already. You had a city that had over 2,000 murders in 1993, go down below 1,000 by 1997. So with the right public policy, the right leadership, you can see this state, New York State, turn around. So I'm inspired by what he was able to do, and that's why I look at him as an incredible asset and an incredible senior advisor to me, because, I mean, when you talk about a change agent, Rudy Giuliani is that change agent. I look, the next governor that's going to be successful in the state of New York, whether it's me, whether it's somebody else, they're going to be taking a lot of plays out of Rudy Giuliani's playbook.
Bueno, nos dice que su padre, en primer lugar, es un gran asesor, un gran consejero que él logró obtener porque él es un agente de cambio. Dice que en 1991 la revista Time decía que Nueva York prácticamente era ingobernable y él pudo darle la vuelta a eso. En el 96 todo cambió, los asesinatos disminuyeron y eso pues es un indicador de que con las políticas correctas y el correcto liderazgo se puede cambiar al Estado. Entonces él se inspira de todo lo que él hizo en su momento y para cambiar Nueva York y darle un nuevo sentido. Dice que los neoyorquinos tienen una sed de cambio y eso es lo que quiere hacer y es lo que quiere pues aprender de su papá o implementar de su papá, que fue en su momento también un gran agente de cambio.
Juan Pablo, yo le quiero preguntar sobre las críticas de sus opositores que argumentan que él tiene poca experiencia en política o incluso experiencia laboral, muy poca experiencia laboral en general. Mr. Giuliani, your opponents say you don't have enough experience in politics or even a solid resume in general. What do you answer to these critics?
My answer to it is, in the time in the White House that I worked over the last 4 years, I was working with the business CEOs and leaders of the United States of America. We worked on the Paycheck Protection Program, which we were instrumental in working directly with the Secretary of the Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, and President Trump to craft what I think one of the great recovery policies in 6 days. The CARES Act is another one, and directly for New Yorkers, what I was working on was to make sure that we preserved thousands of MTA jobs to make sure that they did not lose their jobs during the pandemic. Same thing with the 9/11 health bill. We made sure that the first responders got their funding. They were delinquent $3.9 million. The state was. There was a mix-up between tax identification numbers, which is, again, why a bureaucracy doesn't work. What I would also say is this. I have spent 32 years in politics, whether it's having literally volunteered on campaigns while I was a little kid and seeing how it's gone on, whether it was being in City Hall and watching New York City change, whether it was volunteering on a presidential campaign, or whether it was working in the White House with our business leaders in the country. So while I may be 35 years old and I would be the youngest governor in the history of New York, I actually would slightly surpass by a couple of months a guy named Teddy Roosevelt. You might have heard of him. I think that I have a lot of experience. I know that I have the recipe to make New York change, and we need visionaries. We need people with energy that's going to be able to actually come in and say, we can change New York. Remember, Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence at 27 years old. Hamilton was basically Washington's aide-de-camp at 23 years old. If we just said you're too young, some of the greatest people in American history would not be in the history books. So what I would say is, let's look at the policies. I'll let New Yorkers judge me, and they can decide whether or not experience level will be competent enough to change around this great state.
Well, Mr. Andrew Giuliani, thank you so much for your time in W Radio, and we wish you good luck in your campaign.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it, and thank you to all your listeners for giving me the time to come on. What I would say is, if there's anybody who's interested in learning more, just go to www.nyforgiuliani.com. That's NYFORGIULIANI.com, and sign up and volunteer. If you want to donate, even if it's a couple of bucks, please do that. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to talking with you here again over the next 17 months.
Thank you so much. Bye bye. Bueno, nos dice que él ha pasado, bien o mal, 32 años en la política, relacionado con las campañas, cuando era niño, trabajando en la Casa Blanca con líderes económicos, cuando trabajó con el presidente Donald Trump, estuvo muy cerca del secretario del Tesoro Steven Mnuchin, y trabajó también para que los neoyorquinos pudieran preservar sus trabajos en esa época de pandemia que les pegó tan duro. Entonces dice que así tenga 35 años y sea muy joven y se pudiese convertir en el gobernador más joven en la historia de Nueva York, tiene mucha experiencia, y para él se necesita una persona con energía, una persona visionaria que pueda cambiar Nueva York. Dice que los grandes líderes de la historia de los Estados Unidos, como Thomas Jefferson, por ejemplo, hicieron esos grandes cambios cuando eran jóvenes. Thomas Jefferson tenía 27 años y pues si les hubiesen dicho eso, están muy joven, pues no estarían ellos ahora en los libros de historia. Y finalmente nos dice que si quieren donar, conocer un poco más de su campaña, pueden ingresar a www.newyorkforgiuliani.com, nyforgiuliani.com, y ahí pueden pues apoyar su campaña.